they didn't teach you in school, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there. Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about the fight racism and raise pay protest that took place this past Tuesday, April 4th, 2017, all across the country. Over 24 cities, Black Lives Matter teamed up with the Fight for 15, and this newly formed group is called the Majority. The Majority. So you have more than 50 social justice organizations that have united to form a new coalition to combat injustice and fight for equality on behalf of all marginalized people. Okay, so the 50 organization includes organizations like Black Lives Matter Network, the NAACP, Fight for 15, Indigenous Environmental Network, Black Youth Project, Dream Defenders, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Familia. You have a number of organizations, and together they plan to unite activists across all fields to rally around shared values and intersecting struggles. Okay. Now, as part of their first full-fledged effort, the Majority launched Beyond the Movement this past Tuesday, Beyond the Movement, which was an effort that aims to educate people across the country about important political issues and engage them in various organized efforts to speak out against issues that could harm marginalized communities the most. Okay, so the campaign kicked off April 4th, 49th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it ends on May 1st. The national, May 1st is going to be a national day of action, and it includes a series of events, protests, rallies, and teach-ins designed to attract people of all backgrounds and ethnicities to stand up against both local and national issues. Check out the article from Huffington Post Black Voices, from April 4th, 2017. More than 50 organizations unite to launch nationwide social change campaign. And you can check out the website beyondthemoment.org, beyondthemoment.org. Okay, so and also AtlantaBlackStar.com had an article from March 27, 2017 about this. This is how I found out about this initiative. Black Lives Matter to join forces with wage activists in Fight for 15. Black Lives Matter to join forces with wage activists in Fight for 15. Okay, so, a couple weeks ago, and I think last week, and I know this past Thursday when I guest hosted Wake Up with Steve Hood on 9:10 a.m. Superstation. Be sure to listen to Wake Up with Steve Hood Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the morning show here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, and I'm on every Thursday, 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. I do my segment on Eat Radio. Okay, so we talked about we have a lot to lose. Solutions to advance Black families in the 21st century. This is the agenda that the Congressional Black Caucus presented to Donald Trump and the Trump administration. So you can download it from RolandSMartin.com. Download it from Roland's website, RolandSMartin.com, RolandSMartin.com. Okay, and we're going to continue going through some elements here of the agenda. It's a very powerful agenda. As I said before, they lay out some history of African Americans in the beginning, from slavery to Reconstruction to the Great Migration, the Great Depression. They talk about the slave patrols and night watches that are precursors to modern day police departments, and they were established to control slaves. They talk about how once they arrived to the New World, the slaves were auctioned off like cattle. Most slaves were not allowed to read, write, have legal rights to their children or even marry, and they certainly could not vote. In addition, slaves were sold and resold many times, which resulted in the separation of families. Despite all of this, slaves did form families and even fictive kin, F-I-C-T-I-V-E, fictive kin to support each other under the crushing weight of their enslavement. They deal with how slaves literally built this country, including the United States Capitol and the White House, etc. Okay, so they go from slavery to Reconstruction. They deal with the removal of the Union troops out of the South. They talk about how uneven gains followed after the end of Reconstruction. A few black Americans established solid economic foundations, but many others experienced extreme poverty. This this was because black Americans were shut out from education, healthcare, and access to capital, as well as other resources needed to build wealth. The few pockets of black wealth that did develop were few and far between. One community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street, was destroyed during a race riot started by whites. Okay, that's 1921. We did rebuild Black Wall Street after that, but everybody in Black Wall Street was not wealthy. Yes, some poor people who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma also. Okay, and some of them were maids and things like that. Some of them worked for white people across the railroad tracks in South Tulsa. Okay, so then they go into the Great Migration era, Great Depression, New Deal, World War II, Jim Crow. And Jim Crow they deal with in the South, black codes and Jim Crow laws were used as a tool of oppression. The plight of black Americans in many parts of the country was still unknown. Okay, so they deal with, they lay out some issues pertaining to the African American community, and then lay out solutions, a number of solutions for them. So we talked about voting rights the week before last, because I was in Baltimore last weekend. We talked about voting rights, criminal justice reform. Okay, we dealt with that last time, criminal justice reform, and then we look at on page 30, economic justice. Economic justice, okay? So the CBC calls on the Trump administration to address the widening gap between the rich and the poor in this nation, and create equal access to economic opportunities for all Americans, okay? So they lay out the problems, and they talk about how the racial wealth gap is widening. To gain wealth comparable to white high school dropouts, blacks have to have completed high school and some college. To gain wealth comparable to white high school dropouts, blacks have to have completed high school and some college. Okay, see, these are things that Donald Trump doesn't want to talk about. Then also you have the study called the ever-growing gap, that deals with how it would take the average African American family. It would take the average African American family 228 years to achieve the same amount of wealth that the average white family has today. It would take the average African American family 228 years to achieve the same amount of wealth that the average white family has today. And that's because of a maldistribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources into the hands of Europeans, and because of past public policies. 200 over 200 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow segregation, etc., Jim Crow laws, the convict leasing system, sharecropping, etc. Okay, this is what you're dealing with. And in the study, it talks about how the wealth gap is where the policies of the past show up in the present and the future. The wealth gap is where the policies of the past show up in the present and the future. Okay, so it says black families have been subject to familial separation in slavery, peonage, and mass incarceration, and have been intentionally frozen out of capital, housing, and educational markets absent federal action and regulation. So then they go into solutions. The CBC supports policies that address historic economic disparities and create opportunities to lift all Americans out of poverty and into the middle class and beyond. So some of the recommendations, some of the solutions they lay out. Do not cut taxes for the super rich. Do not cut taxes for the super rich. The House Republican tax plan from fall 2016, a model for Republicans' desired tax reductions for the wealthy, would cut about $3 trillion in revenue from the U.S. Treasury over a decade. $3 trillion in revenue from the U.S. Treasury in over a decade. Once phased in, this will be a huge tax cut for the wealthy. The top 1% will receive 99.6% of the benefit, according to an analysis by the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center. Okay, so they go on to to recommend adopt a fairer tax code that asks the richest Americans, or the richest of the rich, to pay their fair share to meet the needs of the nations, instead of robbing the poor to give a bailout to the rich. Instead of robbing the poor to give a bailout to the rich, the administration should champion comprehensive tax reform that makes our tax code more progressive and fair. For example, expansion of the earned income tax credit and child tax credit would strengthen the social safety net of millions of Americans and bolster pathways out of poverty, because the earned income tax credit is being abolished under the Donald Trump tax plan, at least the initial one. Now, implement the Congressional Black Caucus 10-20-30 formula, okay? And I've heard Representative James Clyburn talk about this. Implement the Congressional Black Caucus 10-20-30 formula across all agencies. The bold initiative, this bold initiative requires federal agencies to commit 10% of their budgets to the 485 counties where 20% of more where 20% or more of the population has been living below the poverty line for the last 30 years. Let me repeat this. This is the 10-20-30 program, and I heard Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina discuss this. This bold initiative requires federal agencies to commit 10% of their budgets to the 485 counties where 20% or more of the population has been living below the poverty line for the last 30 years. Okay? This investment has a broad impact on historically distressed communities. In 2009, these counties were represented in Congress by 43 Democrats and 84 Republicans. Let me repeat this, because see, there are a lot of poor white people that keep voting Republicans in the office, and they keep getting screwed by them, just like in Kentucky. The first thing the state legislature did in Kentucky after they won November 8th, and they got a Republican governor, the first thing they did was pass right-to-work laws in Kentucky, which screw the unions, and many of those people voted to put these people in office. They passed right-to-work laws in Kentucky. So in 2009, these counties were represented in Congress by 43 Democrats and 84 Republicans. The president's fiscal year 2018 budget request proposes drastic domestic spending cuts to programs upon which these communities rely, such as the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. That makes targeted investments in these communities all the more essential. Additionally, the Trump administration should establish a federal interagency task force to coordinate poverty alleviation efforts. They recommend address food insecurity by combating food deserts. Thousands of communities across the country, both urban and rural, lack access to healthy, affordable food. More than 30 million Americans live more than a mile from the nearest grocery store. Providing funding for food banks and nutritional training improves the health of the community. Additionally, the presence of a grocery store can stimulate local economies by creating jobs and anchoring complementary retail businesses. Having been in retail before, in retail management, I can tell you, when you have a grocery store in a plaza, that is an anchor store, and it draws business to all the other stores in that plaza as well, in that strip center, in that plaza. Now, the ultimately, combating food insecurity improves the health and financial well-being of communities at large. Support and expand small business and entrepreneurial opportunities. Now, this is huge, especially for African Americans. Support and expand small business and entrepreneurial opportunities. Increase the Minority Business Administration budget. Increase the Minority Business Administration budget. Now, the MBDA has operated with a budget under $40 million for many years. If the Trump administration is serious about boosting investments in minority-owned businesses, it could study ways to expand support for this agency that helps minority firms compete in a rapidly changing marketplace. Unfortunately, the president's fiscal year 2018 budget request completely eliminates funding for the MBDA, the only federal agency solely tasked with supporting minority businesses. Another suggestion, increase the Small Business Administration's budget and increase the goals of serving small and disadvantaged businesses. Expand the SBA 7 7J microloan program, the SBA, Small Business Administration 7J microloan program. The SBA's microloan program provides loans up to $50,000 to help small businesses start up or grow their farms. These loans could be utilized for working capital, inventory or supplies, furniture or fixtures, and machinery or equipment. Okay, so they give a lot of information here. You can check this out. Download this. This is free to download. Now I took it to a printer and got it printed up. Okay. Next week we'll talk about. We'll deal with this some more because there are elements in here that every African American organization across the country can adopt and use as an agenda, as a platform to push at a local level, state, and national level. Next week we'll talk about. Well, we're off next week because of Easter, but they'll play the best of next week. But the week after that, we'll talk about education. That's on page 39. Go to cbc.house.gov, cbc.house.gov, and download this. We have a lot to lose. Solutions to advance black families in the 21st century. Solutions to advance black families in the 21st century. You can download it, read it at home, study it, implement it. This date in African American history, April 9th, Richard Allen was elected as the first African American bishop during a general convention of the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That began on this date in 1816. Reverend Daniel Coker and 14 African American church leaders from Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania attended. This date in 1870, the American Anti-Slavery Society disbanded. The American Anti-Slavery Society disbanded. We know slavery ends in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, slavery as we knew it then, and they believed that their job was finished. This date in 1898, Paul Robeson, actor, singer, athlete, minister, and activist, was born in Princeton, New Jersey on April 9th, 1898. The famous actor graduated from Rutgers University. He became a Presbyterian minister and obtained a law degree from Columbia University. He was a brilliant, brilliant brother, Paul Robeson. This date in 1919, the African Orthodox Church was organized by George Alexander McGuire. The African Orthodox Church, organized by George Alexander McGuire. This date in 1947, 23 black and white freedom fighters were sent by CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and the Fellowship of Reconciliation to test the South's compliance with Supreme Court decisions on this date in 1947. This date in 1968, funeral services were held for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Funeral services were held for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We know he was assassinated April 4th, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Memorial services were held at Morehouse College, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference elected Ralph David Abernathy to succeed him. This date in 1990, Percy LaVon Julian and George Washington Carver, pioneer scientists, became the first African American inventors elected to the National Inventors Hall of Fame. This date in 1990. Okay, and also this date in 1939. Marian Anderson appeared in an outdoor concert at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. This date in 1939, after she was refused permission by the Daughters of the American Revolution to perform in Constitution Hall for racial reasons. 75,000 people attended. All right, well, look, we got to get out of here. Hey, thanks for listening to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the voice of Detroit. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have information right there on the homepage about the online class I'm teaching this Thursday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, April 13th. Remember, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. We'll talk to you next time, and stay tuned for the show coming up next. What's the name of the show?
Fatima Selma.
Huh?
Between the Lines.
Between the Lines. Between the Lines. Stay tuned for Between the Lines. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.
All right, let me record this promo, Michael.
All right, guys, we got to get out of here. I got to record a promo. Talk to you next time. Peace. Gotta get out of here, guys. Talk to you next time.